There are a lot of videos out there on how to write your own D&D campaign. So why am I making my own video on it? Well, first off, I don't like a lot of the other ones. I remember when I first started trying to write my own D&D campaign, and most of the videos out there were kind of confusing, talking about all these techniques that you can use as if you were making a movie or writing a novel. And while those are awesome, writing a D&D campaign shouldn't be that complicated. It should be an enjoyable experience. And you don't have to be a professional writer or an author or anything like that to write it. So I'm gonna share the technique that I use to write my campaigns. So let's not waste any more of your time and jump straight into it. The first step is I figure out the setting the campaign is going to take place in. I'm a fan of the Eberron setting. Forgotten Realms is another popular one. There's also Dragonlance coming out soon. Whatever, pick your favorite one. You can even write your own, but that's not what we're covering in this video. Once you've decided on a setting, you can move to the next step, which you will do two things, and the order doesn't really matter. The first is figure out who your big baddie's gonna be. You might start off knowing who you want to use as your big baddie, or you might not. Dragons, beholders, liches, those are all pretty classic ones. The next thing you need to do is figure out what sort of conflict is happening, what's pushing the baddie to do what they're doing, all of that stuff. You could skip this step, but I advise not doing it because then you get a big bad guy who's it's kind of empty, kind of boring. They're a big bad guy because they are a bad guy and they just want power because it's who they are. Right? It's not as interesting. The conflict is the kind of the driving force for what is happening in the campaign. So if you're familiar with Waterdeep Dragon Heist, the gold that everyone is looking for is the conflict. And then there's a couple options for bad guys. The conflict can be whatever you want though. The last one that I used in a campaign that my players really liked is basically there was essentially this extra dimensional prison, and every few hundred years the walls to the cell weakened and somebody could try and break out the big baddie in there that would essentially take over the world. So the bad guy of the campaign was actually a necromancer who was raising an army of the dead to make sure that that prison was guarded. So they were kind of like the ends justify the means, but of course the players were like, no, you can't kill thousands of people to raise an army of the undead, even if you're trying to do good with it. Gives more decisions for the players, keeps things a little more interesting. Now, once you have your baddie figured out and you have your conflict figured out, or kind of the theme of the campaign figured out, we're pretty close to the end of my process. The next thing I do is I get some sort of document. Personally, I like using a Word document that is on my OneDrive so I can access it from my phone or my computer. And I just start writing down ideas. I just start putting bullet points where I'm like, this would be a cool idea. That would be a cool idea. Ooh, here's a baddie that can be working for the bad guy. Or what if there's this plot twist that's in there? And I just kind of put all of those down. But I kind of have an idea of what things I want to happen along the journey. The first few sessions I set up, I don't really have much of the story incorporated in it. It's more incorporating some of the players' backstory, letting them develop their characters a little bit, get comfortable before I thrust them into the story. Now you might be thinking, you just outline an adventure. How would you possibly run a campaign with an outline? And it's actually pretty easy. And this is where writing a D&D campaign very much differs from a book and other things. You cannot get all of the details figured out. Don't even try. I don't waste my time trying. I assume that it's going to expand when the players are introduced. That's not even really much of an assumption. It's a pretty much guaranteed. When you introduce your players into the world is going to expand. The players are going to build on things. They're going to go in directions that you can't predict. I don't waste time planning out the details or putting in the rails, so to speak, for the players. I just have checkpoints or things that I want to happen, and then I just kind of throw that in front of the players, whatever direction they head into. The players should have a voice in telling the story and the journey, which they do, and I think sometimes the issues between players and dungeon masters kind of come in when the dungeon master doesn't want to accept how much of a role the players have in telling the story. Now, there is a disadvantage in my method, in that I am planning on writing adventures throughout the entire campaign. Whereas if you're running a pre-written module or you're writing an adventure like it was a pre-written module, you do most of that planning up front. But the reason I am completely okay with accepting that I'm going to have to write adventures throughout there is because even when you run a pre-written module, you still end up spending time between every session or between every arc figuring out how you're going to incorporate all the next stuff and adjust for the weird decisions that your players made. I just don't waste that time up front. I know that it's going to happen. I don't do it up front. I just do it while we're running the campaign, and it gives the players freedom to go wherever they want. The next thing is, if you're running out of ideas and you just don't really know what extra stuff to incorporate, there's a really easy cheat. After you've introduced the conflict, part of the plot, some of the baddies, after the session, just ask your players, well, now that you kind of have a taste of what's going on, what are some of your theories? And they'll write the rest of the campaign for you. You'll just kind of jot down some of the ideas that you like, morph it how you want, and they'll unknowingly assist you write your entire campaign. That's really all there is to it. Should not be a hard process. I ran a 1.5 year long campaign, and the writing of the actual campaign took me like a Sunday afternoon. Now, I did create my own world, and that was the vast majority of it, was building out the world. But the campaign, very easy for me to write, and my players at the end of it were like, man, did you have all that stuff planned out? No, I did not. It was kind of like that Jack Sparrow thing where they're like, did he plan it all out, or, is he just making it up as he goes? I just made it all up as I went. So that's all I have on how to write a campaign. I'm not a fan of overcomplicating stuff, so that's how I do it. If you want to see one of my other videos, just click on the screen. Thanks.